In this video, we are going to talk about classes and objects in Java. So just a reminder that a class is a collection of methods. That's when we first started talking about the organization of a Java program. And then the idea of class goes beyond the the idea as just being an organizational unit in Java. A class can also be thought of in another way as a blueprint or a blank form or a user defined type. Okay, so first to kind of go over the idea of a blueprint. A blueprint is an architectural drawing, right? And what you could do, or what happens, is that when you want to build a building, say they'll have a blueprint, and then that'll get drawn by the architect, and then they will take that drawing, that blueprint, and give it to a construction company, and the construction company will build the building from the blueprint. So these are basically instructions on how to build a specific building. You could take that same blueprint and then give it to another construction company, and they could go build essentially exactly the same building, right, from that same blueprint. Okay, so it's basically the plans for building something. All right, another way you can think of a class is sort of like a blank form. Okay, so for instance, say that you are applying to college, right? And when you want to apply to a college, there's a form that you have to fill out. It's on the internet, right, these days, but basically there's lots of blanks in that form, and then you would go and type and fill out your information in that form, right, to your specific information. So there's a blank for your name, for your address, for where you went to high school, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that form basically is a template for collecting a bunch of information about you as a student when you are applying to a college. Okay. So classes also have that same kind of functionality. So let's say you are writing a program for a college, okay, and let's say that you wanted to have a variable that represented a student in there. So from what we've learned so far, what would you have as the variable? Well, so far we've only have things like int, double, string, and really the information that you would want to capture about a student is way more complicated than any one of those things, right? Their name would be a string, but their age might be an int, and their high school GPA might be a double. Okay, so really a lot of real world objects that you want to represent inside the computer are too complicated for a primitive data type like int or double or even string. Okay, so with classes, what you can do is bind together a bunch of different types of information into a single unit. Okay, and if you think about it, it's kind of like a blank form, right? A blank form basically captures all your information about a in the example that we were talking about, as a student, it would capture all those things like their name, their address, their GPA, their age, and various things like that. Okay, so what you can do with classes is make your own data type essentially. If the int type is not enough or the double type is not enough, then you can make your own user-defined types. So classes kind of can be thought of in all of these three ways, in addition to it being a collection of methods. It's a way of binding together different types of data into a single unit, and usually the reason why we want to do that is because we want to represent a real world object. Okay, so these are the kind of new uses of classes that we're going to talk about. All right, and after we've talked about a class, right, then we will need to talk about an object. So an object is a specific instance of a class. So if you're thinking about a class as being, say, a blueprint, right, a set of plans that are drawn on some paper about how to build a building, well, then the building itself, right, the actual physical building would be an object that was created from the class. Okay. All right, and if you went and created another building in a different location from those same plans, that would also be another object. And then if you're thinking about classes, this new way that we are using classes as a blank form, well then an object would be a filled out form. So for instance, if we're thinking about, say, students applying to colleges, right, the blank form would be the class, and then when the student goes and fills out all of their information in the form and submits the form, that submitted form, the filled out form, would be an object. It has all of the information about the student, a particular student, right, a specific student on that form. Okay. All right. So the objects that we are going to be looking at, right, have two basic functions. They're used to store data, and that could be data of different types kind of combined together into one single user-defined data type, and they can perform operations as well. Those operations are implemented through methods in your classes. Okay. All right, so this new type of class that we're talking about making, right, is that's classes that are similar to a blueprint or a blank form, right? They're going to have basically two types of things. They're going to have fields and methods, all right? So the fields are just going to be data variables inside of a class. So for instance, maybe we want a student class. In that student class, we would have a bunch of fields that represent the characteristics of a student. We would have a field for their name, we would have a field for their address, a field for their GPA, and so on and so forth. Okay, remember what we said was that, you know, a student is probably too complicated of a thing to be represented by just a single variable of string or int or double. So what we can do is combine all different fields or different variables together as fields inside of a class, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. Like I said, classes of this type that we are making, this new type that we haven't made before, they usually represent real-world objects. Okay, over time, people started realizing when they're programming is that people don't really think about people who are writing the programs are humans, right? And humans think about real-world objects in a totally different way than, I don't want to say that a computer would, but because a computer doesn't really think about real-world objects. But the way that the computer represents its programs is kind of like a procedure. Hey, it's just a set of steps that it goes through. Here, do this first thing, then do the next thing, then do the thing after that, and so on and so forth. But when humans think about real-world objects, they don't really think about it as a procedure, right? When humans think about real-world objects, they if you think about it, they kind of think about three different things. Number one, the identity, what that thing is. For instance, if you're thinking about a person, right, you have that you're close to, you have a name that you call them. That's their identity. Hey, that's my dad or my mom or my sister or my brother, or that's my friend, right? Bill, whoever, right? So they have an identity. That's one. And then they have characteristics. So those are things that you think about when you think about, say, like another person. So for instance, if it's another person, you're thinking about how tall are they? What color is their hair? How do they laugh, right? What color are their eyes? Things like that, okay? All right, so those are the characteristics that you would think about. And then another thing that humans would typically think about, another person, place, or thing, or the behaviors of the object. So if it's a person, what do they do for fun? What is it like to deal with the person at work, right? Things that they do that you like, things that they do that you don't like. So things that a person does, or if it's a thing, things that are done to the object. So for instance, a bicycle or something like that. What are the behaviors, things that are done to the bicycle? Well, you ride a bicycle, okay? So identity, characteristics, and behaviors are generally how humans think about another person, place, or thing. Okay, so that's a lot different than the steps that the computer goes through. So when we create classes that are of this type, those three things are represented in there: the identity, which we won't talk about quite yet because that's a little bit complicated. The characteristics of the real world objects, those are going to be captured in the fields. Okay, like if it's a student, what's their name? What's their address? What's their GPA? And then the behaviors of the objects are going to be characterized in the methods, right? If we're talking about, say, a student class, student object, well, then one of the things that you would have to do as a student is calculate your GPA. So you might have a method in the student class that calculates the student's GPA, okay? When we write classes like this, they are generally meant to be used by other outside classes. So in Chapter 5 and in Chapter 6, the programs that we write will actually be two classes. One class that is this new type that just basically bundles together data variables called fields and methods. And then another class that has a main method and that uses this class that we write, okay? So classes of this type that just bundle together the characteristics and behaviors of some real world object, they usually do not have main methods, okay? All right. Oh, one other thing before we get to the example is methods in these classes usually do not have static methods. And that again is a little bit complicated, but we will eventually talk about why that is so. All right, now we are ready for our first example. So let's say that we are writing a program that is going to be used on somebody's cell phone. We're going to write a contact manager class, okay? So right, on your phone, there's some application that lets you save information about people, your contacts, right? The people that you call regularly. You can save probably lots of things lots of information about a specific person. Their name, their telephone number, their birthday, probably what type of phone, their address, on and on and on, okay? If you think about your own phone and its contact application that you probably have on there. Just to keep things simple, okay, when we do this, we are going to just limit our contact application to somebody's name and telephone number, okay? Just to keep it simple at the very beginning. All right, so we are going to create a class, and now this is this new class, the type of class that we're talking about. We're really just kind of bundling together these two variables right here, the variable for the name and the variable for the number, along with some other information, okay? So the contact class should have two fields, name and number, both of type string. And it says the contact class should have one method with this header, public string getName, that returns the contact's name. Okay. All right. So let's get started on this. So this is the first example. So I'm going to start off just like I've done with every other program, and that is with the class header and then the curly braces that offset the oops, I forgot class right here. And then the curly braces that offset the class body. All right, compile that. All right, and so next it says the contact class should have two fields called name and number, both of type string. So those fields are going to be at the very top of your, and I'm just going to put a note. These are the fields. So up at the top of your class, you would put the fields in there. So I have a field for the name and I have a field for the number. So essentially, if you think about this in really basic terms, this contact class is so far just bundling together these two variables right here. So a contact object will have these two variables, name and number, inside of it. All right, and it says the contact class should have one method with header public string get name that returns the contact's name. All right, so public string get name, and it's going to return the contact's name. And that's it. Okay, so remember what I said about these types of classes, right? I said they have fields, and those fields would represent some characteristics of whatever real world object, right, that this class is used to represent. So we're representing a contact, right, which is a person. So the contact in your phone would have probably at the very least, right, a name and a number associated with it. Okay, and there would probably be a lot more in a regular contact class. And then here we have methods. Remember, methods are behaviors that the real world object would do, perform, or that are performed on the real world object itself. So one of the things, right, in your contact application, people would like to be able to view the name of the contact, right? Your application would be pretty useless if you couldn't do that. And there's probably lots of other behaviors. But again, just this is our first example. We're going to make this very, very simple. In an actual contact app, you would probably have a method called call, right? And that call method would send the number to the hardware, right? And then the hardware would, go through and set up the connection with the other person, right? And lots of other things in there. Okay, let's compile that, make sure everything's good. All right, so one thing to notice here, right, is that static is missing. And on these types of classes that we make, we're not generally going to have static here, okay? Basically, just a real quick overview of what static means. When you have something that is marked as static, it means it's shared by all of the objects, right? So something like a person's name is generally not shared. So for instance, imagine we're sitting in the classroom, okay? I know we are not, but let's say we were all sitting in the classroom and then somebody else busts in the classroom and said, hey, what's that person's name? But they don't reference anybody. They don't point to anybody. We would all kind of be looking at each other going, well, who are you talking about? Right? It depends on who you're talking about as to what the correct answer is, right? So that's an example of a piece of information that's not static. Not everybody in the whole class has the same name, okay? Everybody has different names, and so that's essentially the reason why this is not marked as static. On the other hand, let's say somebody busted into the classroom and said, hey, what class is this? Well, then we wouldn't need to have any particular person pointed out because that's something that we all would share, right? Anybody in the class could say, hey, well, this is CMPS 1301, right? So that is an example of something that is static. It's shared by everybody in the class, but certainly the name is not, and so that's why this is not marked as static. All right, and so that's it. This is our contact class. It's done. All its purpose is it bundles together these two variables, right? And this behavior. This behavior is it lets a outside class look at the name in here, okay? All right, so that is the very first example, and we have done this, okay? Okay, so now what we want to do is to talk about, all right, now that I've created this program over here, how does another program use this contact object? Because essentially this is not meant to be run by itself. If you try to run this, right, you're going to get this message right here. There's no main methods. JavaFX applications, applets, or midilets found in the file. So essentially Java tried to run this file and said, hey, I don't even know where to start because there's no main method in here. or any of those other things that it mentioned. So Java literally had no idea where to start, and that's because this kind of class is not meant to be run as the programs that we were running before. All it is meant to bundle these things together. Okay, so what we want to do, or how an outside program uses this class that we just made, is that outside program will create objects. So it will create specific instances of that class. Okay. So to create an object from a class, we use the new keyword. We've already used this once before with scanner, right? Remember, when you want to use scanner for console input, then you have to create a scanner object, okay? And in that scanner object, we use the new keyword, okay? So to create a contact object, what we would do is to declare a variable, okay? In this case, this is the name of the variable, contact1. And remember, every variable in Java has to have a type. So the type of that variable will be the name of the class. So that class that we created is called contact. If we want to create a contact object, right, then we put the name of the class, right, which is contact, and then a name that we create for the variable, and then the assignment operator, and then the new keyword, okay? And then the name of the class again, followed by open and close parentheses. All right, so this is how we would create a contact object. This is how an outside class would use this class that we have just created. Okay, so we're going to write a Java application named testcontact.java that creates two contact objects. All right, so we would create another class and call test contact, and this would have a main method, public static void main string args, and then the method body. So this test contact class is similar to the classes that we were creating before. All right, so this is going to be our outside program that is using this contact class over here, right? Okay, so I'm going to create a contact object. All right, so I'm going to create a variable, right, called contact1. You can call this anything you like. And it has to have a type. Like all variables in Java, the type of this is going to be the name of the class that I created from. Okay. Right, and then equals new, and then contact, and then open and close parenthesis, and we'll talk more about this in chapter 6. All right, so compile it, run it, and that's what you get. And it looks like nothing happened, but that is not true at all, right? So let's take a look at this in Canvas. That's Control-Shift-R. All right, it will run this in Canvas. Okay, and so now there's only one line, this on line 6. So see how this runs. I am going to use the curvy arrow, right? The curvy arrow will jump around and go actually into this methods. So what's going to happen here, when I hit this curvy arrow, you're going to see it's going to jump to this contact class, and take a look at it. So now you can see we're in the contact class, and it's going to say, okay, I've got to set up a name, and I've got to set up a number. So it will set up all these fields, okay, and then jump back to where it was called from. All right, and then that sets up inside the memory your contact object. So if you are looking at this in Canvas, you can click on this and drag it over and actually look inside of your contact object. So in the memory right now, there is a space, right, for this contact object, and again, it's packaging together a name and a number. All right, and so you can see over here that the name and the number are null. Okay, so null basically is a keyword that tells you that there's no value in here. So in our contact object, we haven't really set up the name and the number, but it does exist. There is room in the memory for us to put this information. Okay. All right, so that's what our contact object would look like, and that's it. All right, we need to create another one. It says to create 2 contact objects. So I'm going to create another one. So I'm going to call this one contact 2. Remember, you could call this one Bill if you wanted to, right? This is just the name that you choose. It is created from a contact class, so we'll have to put that there as the type. And then the same thing over here. All right, and we'll run this in Canvas. So that's just like before, and then now we're going to create a second contact object. So it's going to bounce on over to the contact class and check out those fields up there. And then we are going to get another contact object. Okay. And again, you can see this is not so great because the name and the number are not set. We still have these nulls in here. Okay. But we do have 2 contact objects that are created. Okay. All right. So that is how an outside class would set up or would use these other types of classes that we created. The classes that bundle together the fields and methods, right? So that's basically how they are used for the most part. All right, we need to talk about, before we get started, let's see, how are we? We are 27 minutes in, so let's cut it off here, and then we will separate this out into a second video.